Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thanks for coming to my channel. I really appreciate you visiting. If you wouldn't mind, would you hit the like button before you leave? That helps to get my channel promoted quite a bit. So, also helps if you leave comments. So I love to get comments from you as well. I try to answer them all too. So, but today I thought maybe we could do some earrings, and I've made some like this in the past. I'm not sure what we're going to call them yet, but they have kind of a double teardrop on the bottom, which I've made just by themselves before, but I'm going to add a stone onto the ear wire this time so that it has kind of two components for each earring. And I picked out a couple of little tiny turquoise oval cabs, and I think they'll be pretty with this. So we'll give it a go and see how it turns out. Wanted to thank some people. We just passed 5,000 subscribers on YouTube, and that's amazing. Thank you so much, all of you subscribers, for signing up. It's gratifying to know that people are finding this stuff useful, and so I really appreciate you signing up. And I will continue to make you hopefully good content that you enjoy. So appreciate that. Also, my patrons over on Patreon, it's kind of a nice community, so you might want to check that out. I appreciate all of their support as well. I actually got to meet one of my patrons in person this weekend when I was doing a show. So thanks for coming by, Deanna. I really appreciated it. It was nice to meet you, and it's nice to put a face to someone I've known as a patron. So thanks for coming by. Hey, well, let's get started on the project. All right, well, here's one of the things that's in my merch store is this design idea book that I draw out my designs in advance on. I didn't used to do that too much, but it's really helped me to come up with some superior outcomes. So what I like about it is the little graph paper on it. It's just dots instead of lines. It interferes less with my eyes when I'm looking at the drawing that I'm making, but it still allows me to keep some symmetry going on there. Here's the little turquoise cabs I have. They're pretty small. Let's see what they are. They're about, they may be 5x7s or 6x4s. I think they're 6x4s. So we'll make a couple of little bezel cups for those. I was debating whether I should do it this way on the earring or this way on the earring. You tell me in the comments whether I make the right decision or not. I think probably most people would do it like that, so I'm going to do it like that, just to be different. Although maybe I have that backwards, who knows. So I did some measuring. If I want double loops like this, I'm going to have to create kind of a plus sign out of some wire, and I'm going to use 14 gauge wire for it. So we'll cut one that's 38 millimeters long, and these ones about 18 millimeters each, and I'll double check that the length to the corner is exactly the same, and then we'll fold them up into teardrop shape, solder them at the top, and then we'll build a little link chain there connecting the two and put an ear wire on the back of the bezel, and I think we'll be done. So I think to start with, I'm going to make some bezels here, so let's do that. If you've never visited my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder for virtually everything, and I use a spray-on flux called My-T-Flux. It's not the only way to do things, but it's the way that I do things, and so I will show you what I'm going to do. So I have some 3/16 inch bezel, which is kind of the size that I buy and keep around, because it's tall enough for most things, and I can also file it down shorter if I want to. So it's just a convenient generic size to use. For these guys, I'm probably going to cut these in half or at least thinner before I even start filing them down. So I'm going to cut a strip that's a little bit thinner for these first, so just to save me some filing. See if that's enough. Should be enough for one. Let's see if it's enough for two. Actually, let me file the end flat first. Had a nice show this weekend. It was in Greeley, Colorado. I met a lot of nice people. Sold quite a bit of jewelry. Weather was decent. All in all, it was a good show. Those do get tiring the more old I get. I used to be able to throw those tents up and down pretty fast, but my back just can't do that so much anymore. So there's that one. Let's see if we got enough. I think we got enough for this one too. I always leave just a little extra, not very much, on these, so that I can file them to be nice and straight. Let's get these nice and flat, and then file the second side flat as well. Always a little fried after sitting out in the sun for a couple of days in a row. Even when you're under a tent, it gets sort of oppressive occasionally. But at least this year it wasn't as hot as it usually is at this show, so it was a little more tolerable. Okay, and I'm going to make this into an angular shape so that I can point the two ends towards each other nicely and solder them cleanly. Alright, got a couple of pieces of solder here. Maybe a few extras in case I shoot it off the table like I usually do. When I have an oval stone like these, I usually put the solder joint on the long side of the oval because you don't have to bend it quite as far, and the solder joint's always a little bit stiffer than the rest of the bezel because it's a little bit thicker, and solder is physically a little bit stiffer than the fine silver for sure. I think we did pretty good on the size. I think my file's getting dull. I think I might need to invest in a new file pretty soon. It's always nice when you get a brand new file because things come up so nice and easily. Alright, let me find a little 26 gauge. That's what I use for most little bezel backs like this. Alright, I was just flattening those out because when you cut them off sometimes they get a little curved. Those side that I filed downwards. I always like to put the side that's more neatly shaped downwards because that's going to become the final profile of the stone. I have plenty of solder to solder this on, so I'm going to flux these and then I'll dry the flux and I'll drop a couple of those in there. I might just need one a piece for these ones. These are pretty small. Although I'd rather have more than not enough. So. We'll throw 2 in each just to be safe. The only thing I need to do is make sure they're touching the sides and the bottom. I'm going to trim off the excess here. I'm just filing off the lip that's left over after I trim it as close as I can. You want to make sure you keep it parallel with the the bezel and not bevel it under too much. If you start to bevel it under, you may cut through your solder joint. And then you'll have a hole, and then people will talk. They'll say, "Did you see the hole in his bezel or her bezel?" How embarrassing. Alright, so I think, like I said, I'm going to use 14 gauge wire for the actual little teardrop shapes. And like I said, I'm going to cut, since I'm doing 2 earrings, I'm going to do 2 38 millimeter pieces, and then I'll do 4 18 millimeter pieces, and then we'll solder them into little X's like that. So that'll be our next step. Sometimes when I get a pretty precise measurement, I'll use the marker. You know, 10, 20, 38 was what I said, I believe. So I'm going to make a mark there. And then where it's 38, it should be right there. It's easier to see a scratch against the purple. So let's do that as our guide. Then we got to find the center point on the bigger ones, so we can know where to solder on the cross pieces. So, I can see how close I got the center if I line these up like this. The ends are pretty close together. If I flip them around, or one of them around, and then line up the center point again, the ends should still be lined up pretty close. Pretty good. Okay, so the trick now is going to be not really much of a trick, but we just need to solder the cross pieces. You may notice that I do a lot of pick soldering when I'm doing it. I find that that's the thing that has moved me from an amateur to someone who's not as amateur of an amateur. So you might consider learning how to pick solder. I'll put a link up there for you if you want to see my pick soldering video. It might be worth looking into. It certainly speeds things up too. Cool thing about soldering silver is if you don't have things quite straight or something, you can always heat it up to the flow point again. If you can keep it liquid, you can nudge things around a little bit, you know. Alright, let me find my little bail making pliers. I think if I kind of go like this, so it's an X, and bend these that way, kind of do the same thing here. the other way. I think eventually we can bring these all together in the center point. Once we get it pretty close, get everything kind of squared up like that. And so now I'm going to file my little file here like this, with the flat side. File it straight up and down on the inside edge here. Nice straight up and down sort of flattish surface. If you can see that one, it's kind of like straight up and down now. So that's what I'm going to do to all 8 of them here. So I'll be right back. I filed the ends down so they're more that way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push these ones, 2 of them, to the center. And they're always going to kind of spring back a little bit because to get 2 things pushing together takes a little effort sometimes. So I'm going to try and get those ends relatively lined up. And then I'm going to bend them a little bit in the middle here, like that, towards the center. Turn it downwards like that. That'll kind of push those 2 together so they're pushing on each other. If I don't like the configuration here, once they're soldered together, I can change that a little bit. So, and then I'm going to do the same thing with these ones, butt up to the outside of that thing. If you have a gap between them, solder doesn't like to fill an empty space, unfortunately. That would make some things a lot easier. But as long as you got them touching nicely, we can get a good solder joint probably. Start with these magnesia blocks like this. Push it in so it's upright. I got plenty of solder on this pad down here, so I'm just going to pick a little solder to hold those all together after I flux it, of course. I'm going to use a reasonably good sized piece of solder here because I got basically 4 little solder joints here. Well, 3. I may even add a little more. Looks like one of them didn't quite solder. Okay, I think I'm going to file kind of a flat top on them a little bit. I'm going to wrap some 18 gauge around a piece of 14 gauge wire. I'm going to solder these rings closed with a reasonably sized piece of solder here, pretty good size for soldering a ring closed, so that I have some excess solder there that I can just plop them on top of these guys. Decide which way I want this to face, and I think probably this way. So I got to heat this until it's hot enough for the solder on the ring to stick to this. Just mount it like that. Just straighten it up a little bit. That's about how I want it. Try to do the same thing over here. I'll take a look at those and see how straight they are. Those are pretty good, I think. I think those are alright. So I'm going to go ahead and add some rings onto these guys. I'm just going to butt the solder that I just put up on that ring up against the bezel here. You just got to heat the bezel until it's hot enough for that to melt the solder that's touching it. Like that should have a connection. You can always pick a little bit more in if you don't feel like it's a good connection. Now it looks like a good connection. Alright, so I think before I connect these to the other ones, we should put the 20 gauge ear wire on these, on the back. Alright, so let's cut off a couple pieces of this. I'm going to flatten the end of the wire here just a little bit. Okay. Alright, so I want them to hang down a little bit more than that, so let's do some rings that are a little bit bigger. And just wrap them around something a little bigger, but I'm just going to use my bell making pliers here. Make a couple of loops around this one. See how that size is. think that's probably a pretty good length, honestly. A little movement there. Some turquoise. I think those will be attractive. I think you could adjust the size however you want, but I like these ones. I think that's a good size, so I think I'll do those. For these, I'm going to use the magnesia block again. It's convenient for pushing things down into that you don't want to fall apart. So if I do that, and I heat just the ring here, I should be able to pick solder just the ring, because this is one of the few times where I don't want to heat the entire piece. Most of the time you do, but since we have separate pieces I don't want to solder together, I'm just going to focus the heat on the ring only. I'm going to heat the whole thing once I've flowed just a little bit. Then let's throw it in the pickle. And we'll do the second one. Heat the whole thing a little bit. So I'm going to heat that up, throw it in the pickle, and then we're pretty much done except for setting the stones and polishing. So I will get those polished up after they're done pickling, and we'll set the stones and we'll be done. I went ahead and set one of them like this and bent the ear wire how I'm going to bend it, except for the last little part. I left this one seated and ready to go. I do this a little differently than some people do. I use my needle nose pliers the side of them, and I'm going to push straight in kind of once I have the stone set to the correct depth, just to remove any space between the bezel and the stone. Last stage is called burnishing. I'm just going to use the rounded outer part of these needle nose to rub that top edge smooth and tight against the stone as much as you can. Alright, so one other thing I did, I soldered these on. I normally buy a 20 gauge round wire specifically for ear wires, and I buy it half hard because a lot of times I'm making a French hook that is a separate piece from the earring that I'm hooking it to, and so half hard is advantageous right off the bat because you don't have to additionally work harden it to make it stiff enough for an ear wire. Once you solder it onto something, though, that takes that work hardening out of it, and you have to re-harden it somehow. So what I did was, and that's the reason this end is bent here, is I took it and I grabbed it and I held it near the base here and I twisted it over and over again, which causes a tremendous amount of torque and movement to the structure of the metal in there, and it causes it to work harden pretty quickly. So you just got to be careful not to go too far. So next thing I'm going to do is bend it forward a little bit. I usually use a pencil, like a round pencil. It's kind of a point to wrap it around. And then while I'm doing it, push my finger in like that a little bit. And then we'll take a look at the other one and try and match it as close as we can. The only thing I really need to do now is figure out where I'm going to cut these off. So I'm going to cut them off, oh, I don't know, about the bottom of the bezel maybe. And the last things that I do are tweak the end up just a little bit like this. And then I use a file to kind of smooth these out so they're nice and smooth. You can use a cup burr to round these off. I found the hand ones don't work very well. You can spin them and it never really does much. I think if you put one on a rotary tool, though, it works pretty good. So I'll do a little bit of final cleanup. around the top of the bezel and stuff. Those are my two earrings. I think they came out kind of cute. Like I said, I'll neaten things up a bit and shine it up around the links and everything, and it should be a nice looking photo at the end. So, all right. Well, that was the double teardrop earrings. I hope you enjoyed the project. I know that I did, and I think I'm kind of pleased with the way they came out. So make sure before you leave to hit the like button, and I'd love to have a comment from you if you enjoyed the video, or if you had some constructive criticism or some ideas for a challenge or something like that. That's always great. So leave me a comment and let me know what you think, what you need. Check out the video description down below for the various links if you're interested in Patreon, or if you want to just buy me a coffee for my time to help me keep in supplies and stuff. There's also a link to my website if you want to check out the jewelry for sale. And there's even a link to my merch store, which I believe there's also one right below the video if you're using a PC or a Mac, or even on your phone, I think. So check those things out. Thanks for visiting. Happy silversmithing. Take care.